Hi, with us tonight is Laurie Taylor. Laurie is a parent who lives in Goshen and has 2 children in the Fayetteville school system. And several months ago, I guess you became aware of some books in the Fayetteville school library that I guess you were offended by, I guess for lack of a better term.
Well, it wasn't necessarily that I was offended by the books. It was that my children had access to them without my knowledge.
And what these books were?
The first 3 books, well, the first 2 books, It's Perfectly Normal and It's So Amazing, are, I guess you would call them sex education books, but they go far and beyond the biological and contraceptives-based information.
How did you become aware of the books?
I got a letter from an organization that I support.
It was a church mission that you support.
Well, it's a radio program.
Really? Which radio program?
It's called Point of View. It is a Christian-based radio program.
Was that a local radio program?
No, it's national.
Okay.
And they sent me a letter and said that they had been made aware of a book that is touted and distributed by Planned Parenthood. And they gave a description of the book and listed that it had pictures in it that were very, very explicit, that were very, very graphic, and that in the book that it advocated certain sexual choices and certain surgical procedures, abortion, certain contraceptives, and that it went into a litany of other very personal, to me personal, for my children, topics that aren't necessarily congruent with the beliefs that I'm trying to instill in my kids.
So what did you do after you became aware of these books? What was your next step?
I went and bought the book. I went online and checked to see if it was actually at our school. Not only was it in the Fayetteville School District, but it was at my child's school. So I went and got the book. I read it from cover to cover. I looked at it. And then I went to the librarian and said, in a discreet, I mean, it was really kind of funny because I was kind of embarrassed.
Yeah.
And went in because the book has over 55 nude images in it. And I'm not talking about biological sterile images. I'm talking about pictures of young children naked, young children copulating. It has a little boy sitting on the side of a bed masturbating. Pictures that are just indescribable in their explicitness. And so I went to her and I said, you know, I just wanted to let you know that I found this, thinking that she was going to be just as appalled as I was. And of course she wasn't. Actually, she was incensed.
What did she say?
She said, Mrs. Taylor, this is not your problem. She said, what you need to do is you just need to teach your children not to check this book out. And I said that would be fine, except for that I did not know this book existed. And I said, you know, are there other books here, you know, that follow this? And she said, well, you know, something to the effect, and I'm not quoting directly, but, you know, there are all kinds of books here, and it was her job to represent each and every viewpoint. And I said, well, that's insane, because you don't represent each and every viewpoint here, because we don't have books in here on how to build bombs, and we don't have books in here on how to hijack large airplanes and fly them into tall buildings in New York City, and we don't have books in here that advocate the Klan, and we don't have books in here that advocate the advantages to being a drug dealer. So not every viewpoint is represented in the library.
I guess she meant a legal viewpoint, I guess.
Well, I would submit to you that the things that are propagated in these books are not legal, because it's illegal for a minor to have sex.
So what did you do after that?
She told me a procedure that I could follow for having the book reconsidered.
Yeah.
And so I filled out the proper forms. I called someone that I knew that was on the school board and asked them what I should do, and they encouraged me to attend the next school board meeting, which I did. And that was it. The committee formed. The committee, which is the members of the committee, it's my understanding that most of those are still on the same review committee that puts the books in the library.
Yeah.
So it's kind of this circular argument with, I mean, it's kind of crazy. And actually what they did was they gave me a very large manila envelope full of their dissertation, which was There were 7 of them, and they covered 23 points. And what I found so frustrating is that this book talks about premarital sex. This book talks about homosexuality. It talks about abortion. It talks about the most controversial topics of our time. And on 23 points, these 7 people unanimously agreed on all 23 points. I find that very unlikely. You could go to my church and not find 7 people to agree unanimously on 23 points, including that involved homosexuality, abortion, and premarital sex. So in my eyes, and I think it was a valid point, it was kind of a rigged deal. So when I got there...
When you said they were all in agreement, does that mean they all said the book should be in the library? Or?
No, they didn't even say that. Actually, the board was the committee, I'm sorry, was the first one to suggest that the books be removed from the general circulation and put into the parent library. The only difference between what the committee suggested and what ultimately happened, what I wanted to happen, was that the parents of each child would have the say whether their child should have access to this material or not. What the committee wanted was for the final authority to be an administrator. And my objection to that was that an administrator does not have the right to expose a child to sexually pervasive material without the consent or knowledge of the parent. And case in point is here in Fayetteville, we had a man that was the principal of the middle school that my little girl goes to that was arrested in Little Rock for sexual crime. And so did I want that man sitting in a room reading this book to my daughter? Or would you want your nephew or somebody's son sitting in a room with this man that has been convicted of sexual crimes? So to circumvent the parents in a subject where legally the school has to inform the parents on sex ed class, then I think it's unconscionable for them to allow reading material that not only advocates but encourages sexual promiscuity, homosexuality, abortion, and myriads of other sexual...
When you say they encourage promiscuity, abortion, or homosexuality, exactly what do you mean?
Well, I mean that in that one book, it's perfectly normal. On one of the pages, it specifically states that children should go and touch each other, and they should experiment with their sexuality to see if they're homosexual or heterosexual. It explicitly says that.
I would think kids would know, I guess by the time they're teenagers, whether they're homosexual or heterosexual, without touching anybody else.
Well, I mean, I don't know enough about that realm of the homosexual, how that all comes to being, and I'm sure we wouldn't agree on how I perceive that.
Now, is that the book, It's Perfectly Normal?
Yes.
So what happened eventually? Was that the book that was taken off the shelves?
Those first 3 books, It's Perfectly Normal, It's So Amazing, and The Teenage Guy Survival Guide, which that book itself also endorsed pornography and encouraged young men to secure pornography, which is illegal, and not only to do that, but to keep it from their parents, and said a statement, and I quote, thousands of men and some women look at and enjoy pornography daily. And I find that to be something that I don't want my kid reading, especially if I don't know about it. Now, if you happen to think pornography is okay for your child, then I don't have a problem with you having your kid read this or even getting it from the school. I'm just saying that it shouldn't be available to students without their parents knowing.
So they're in what's called a parents' library?
Yes.
Now, what is the parents' library?
You know, I don't know. I know that it's a state law
Yeah.
that every school in the state of Arkansas has a parent section. And the way that it was explained to me before was that it is in a library where parents can go to check out books that deal with parent issues. It's not an adult library, although it very well may turn out to be if we put the rest of these books in there. But it's simply a place where you might have that book, the baby book, what to do the first year, or what to expect the first year, something along that lines. So I think that's what that's for.
Okay. Now, these 3 books aside, you have a further list of books.
Yes.
Now, how many are on this list?
There's not an exact number yet. I keep finding stuff every day that is absolutely, again, unconscionable to hand to children without the parents knowing. Initially, it was 70. I have a list of 170 potential titles, and I got that from seeing that same authors, same genre, things like that taking place. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't know a specific number, and I'm not looking to ban books.
Right.
I'm just wanting parents to have an authority.
Now, how did you become aware of these books, the larger list?
After my last school board meeting where they decided to take the first 3 books off, a comment had been made to me by someone that was associated with the library at the school initially that said, Laurie, these books are nothing compared to what else is out there. And I really didn't think anything about that then. But then after I had the first 3 books, I got home and I got an email. And I still to this day don't know who it's from. And it said, Mrs. Taylor, if you think those 3 books were bad, you should take a look at some of these. And it listed some of the books. One of the books that is the most vile, in my opinion, is called Push. And it's a novel by Sapphire. And it is beyond the pale of anything that if it were made into a movie, it would be rated X.
What's it about?
It's about a young woman, I think she's 13 or 14-year-old African-American girl who is consistently molested by her mother and father. She has a child with Down syndrome from her father, and she's pregnant with her second child. And not only does her father molest her, but he also molests her 3-month-old baby.
So, now, are these books available in the Fayetteville Public School Library?
Yes.
Okay. So all this 170 books, or what you think that many, are all available in the public school library?
Yeah, and they're available to every child of any age in all of Washington County.
Isn't it true, though, that like a 3rd grader could request the book, but the librarian could say, well, you can't have that book because it's...
Well, no, I think that is censorship because the librarian is actually a government employee and the government cannot tell anybody what they can or cannot read. So that is actually the true definition of censorship. Also, I would say that if the librarians themselves are the ones responsible for having this in the library and they uphold the Library Bill of Rights, which they all profess to do by their mission statement, then I don't think that they would be inclined to do that based upon the statements that have been made during this whole issue. And I certainly wouldn't want a librarian telling my child what they can and cannot read.
But they are doing it, though, aren't they?
No, they're not. I found several of these books that have been transferred from the high school to even elementary schools to children. So,
which books? Do you know which books?
Tenderness is one that I saw last. I can't recall all the titles, but specifically I even printed it off and emailed it to the district that per the internet catalog, the book Tenderness was in transit to, I believe it was either Holcomb or Happy Hollow Elementary.
So do you know what happened after that? Do you know if it ever got to the kid?
I don't know, but I can tell you again that my neighbor's child, when he was in the 7th grade, has had several of these books that he has read that he has requested from the high school to the middle school.
How does he seem?
How does he seem?
How does he seem?
Well, I mean, he's just a typical 14-year-old little boy that, you know, I mean, I'm not saying that reading this material makes you Jeffrey Dahmer. I'm just saying that Jeffrey Dahmer reading these books was incited to do things that he wouldn't typically have done had he not had some push from some kind of pornographic material.
What was the reaction from individual members of the school board?
By name?
No, not by name. You can if you want to. But
well, I think that all of them were absolutely horrified, all but one. Mr. Kring seemed to be not very moved. There was even a statement made by one of the school board members when I was about to show some of the pictures on the big screen that this could not be shown on television because we were on public TV and kids were watching. And I said, well, I find that funny that this is in my little girl's elementary school, but yet you don't want me to show it on television. I have not yet read any of the excerpts from this list of books out loud, frankly, because I wouldn't say these words out loud, especially in a public forum. But if you'd like to, I can read some for you now.
What's the public reaction been?
The public reaction has been both sides. I mean, I've gotten thank you very much for informing me, letting me know. I had no idea, to somebody calling me a vile subhuman pig. So.
And you've been compared to the Nazis.
I have been several times compared to the Nazis, which I find really interesting, because the Nazis are the one who actually took the children away from the parents and gave them over to the government.
Right.
And I'm advocating the direct opposite, that the government let go of the children and give them back to the parents. So I'm wondering who's the Nazi.
So what would the ideal solution for you?
The ideal solution would be that these books be placed in a restricted area, or rated, or marked, or somehow identified, so that parents could instruct their children not to read them if that parent does not want to. Again, if you as a parent are comfortable with your child reading this material, I think that's great. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with a lot of things, but this is America, and everybody has a right to their own opinion. But as a Christian, as a mom, as a conservative person, I do not want my children reading about a grown man molesting a baby in diapers with the vernacular that is used. Now, I think it's important for kids to have information. I think it's paramount for children to know things like rape and incest and homosexuality and heterosexuality and oral sex. I think it's important that they know all of that. But I think it should be done from a biological standpoint as information, and not to titillate young children into egregious sexual acts.
What about, so you don't think the material should be purged from the library at all?
No, I've never said that. Never. I've never advocated that. I've never even asked for a librarian to be fired. I've never asked for an inquiry to who placed this material there, not once.
You know, the Agape Press, which interviewed you online,
Yes.
They quoted you as saying you want the material purged.
No, I said, what I did say was that in my world, they asked me the same question, in my world, what would be the utopia? And I said, this stuff would never be printed in my world.
Okay, I think they quoted you out of context.
Well, they may have.
Yeah.
But in my world, this stuff would not exist. But in my world, there's lots of things that wouldn't exist. I mean, we wouldn't have smog.
Yeah, you definitely need to talk to those people.
Okay, well, I
Okay.
will do that.
But to go on, anyway, do you think there's a danger, and have some people talk to you, that maybe some of what you're talking about is perhaps taking some things out of context? And I've looked over your list. Okay?
You mean as far as the verbiage?
Yeah, I looked over your list, and I'll tell you, I'll grant you this. I think some of these books shouldn't be in the school library. I don't agree that all of these books should not be in the school library, because I think some of them are modern day classics, like Toni Morrison's Beloved, Isabel Allende's books, Love in the Time of Cholera. I think these are just truly excellent books. And my nephew, who's running a camera here today, when he's 17, I think he'd be old enough to read these books.
Oh, absolutely, I would
to
concur with you.
understand. I think at 14, he doesn't have the maturity.
Or the mental capacity.
Not to say he's immature, but he doesn't have the worldly experience to be able to understand the books. But I think by the time he's 17, I think that he would be able to understand the books. A lot of kids wouldn't. I think a lot of these books don't need to be in the library, but I think there's a danger for some people in looking at like a couple paragraphs of some of these books and saying, oh, well, just take this out, and without looking at the book as a whole.
Okay. Well, I would agree with you that when he's 17, as his uncle, that you would know him better than a librarian would, better than a teacher would, better than an administrator would. You know his mother and father. You know you've been around him his entire life. And I would suggest that if you thought that that was a prudent decision, then that would be a prudent decision. To look at the excerpts that I've taken from these books,
Right.
I would tell you that there's not enough context in the world for the F word. There's not enough. To me, that word is offensive. I don't care how you use it. If you use it as a verb or as a noun or as a dangling participle or whatever context you want to put it in.
That sounds like the old Lenny Bruce routine.
It's offensive. I don't want my child desensitized to that word by reading it. In one of these books, that word is used 35 times in the first 3 chapters. Now, color me stupid, but
I don't think anybody's doing that.
Well, I'll send you some more emails that I've gotten.
I've seen some of the emails.
I've been called illiterate. I've been called uneducated. I've been called uninformed. I was a philosophy major in school, so I've read. I think that the books that you've mentioned could be construed as classics. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with you allowing your child or your nephew to read them. He can read Push for all I care. I mean, it's a vile, nasty, dirty book. But if you want him to read it, even at 14, I don't have a problem with that. All I'm saying is, you're his uncle. You're making a conscious decision to give him that book. I'm not being afforded that same right. My right as a parent is being totally circumvented by a system that has placed books there knowingly that are sexually explicit, that are vulgar beyond anybody's imagination. And I can tell you that nobody, well, I shouldn't say that, there are very few people that understand how vile this is. And I mean, you'd kick me off your show if I started reading some of this garbage.
Do you find that a lot of people who are debating with you are people who really don't want to know what's in the books?
Yes.
They want to debate, let's say, on a higher level.
What they want to debate is ideology, and this is not about ideology. This is not about political affiliation. This is not about religion. This has nothing to do with the fact that I'm a Christian. It has everything to do with that I'm a parent. And as a parent, liberal or conservative, heterosexual or homosexual, Republican or Democrat, Christian or atheist, I have a right to be the only one that subjects my child to anything of a sexual nature. And I really don't understand why this has become so controversial, except for somebody mentioned the word ban and people went nuts. And if they would take the time to investigate before they open their mouths and send mean emails, they would learn that I've not asked for anything like that. All I've said was we rate TV, we rate movies, we rate video games, we rate music now, because everything has gone beyond the pale of what's the norm and what's morally accepted in our culture. And you know what? I would never do this, but I was talking to somebody the other day, and I said, you know, I'm just going to go have these excerpts put on a T-shirt, and I'm just going to walk around town and see how many people are offended. Now, you would agree with me that the majority of people would be absolutely enraged.
I think so, yes.
And it wouldn't have anything to do with what their ideology beliefs are,
Right.
or what political affiliation they hold, or whether they're a learned person or a steel worker.
Right.
They're going to be offended. You do not talk to your nephew like you talk to your buddies.
No.
You do not talk to your mother like you talk to your friends.
No.
So there's a line of decorum, and whether people's line is the same line as mine is not a relative. There is not relative. There is a line of decorum.
Right.
And there's a line of morality in this country, and this surpasses that. And all I'm asking is, as a parent, please don't surpass it with my kids without me knowing about it. It's just like the sex class. They gave my little girl a sex class without me knowing. And I said, look, I don't care that you teach sex here. I don't care that you teach evolution, and I don't agree with evolution. I don't care that you teach her that oral sex is a alternative to intercourse. What I do care is that you're doing that without me knowing. Okay? If you're going to give a class discussing oral sex, then I'm going to take my daughter out. You can teach everybody else's kid, but I should have the right to pull my child out.
Yeah.
And that's all I'm asking. And I think that's fair, and I think that's reasonable. You know, if I came across here and said, you know, Richard, these books, you know, totally offend my Christianity and my beliefs, and I want them out. And nobody should ever, I want them burned. I don't think they should hurt. I mean, that's ridiculous. That's not what, I mean, I'm a veteran.
Right.
I fought so people had these rights, and I believe in them with everything that I have.
Part of the problem clouding the issue is that you have people who've never met you, okay, who have taken upon themselves to support you. And you've seen a lot of letters to the editor. Some
Yes.
are coming all the way from Jonesboro. And they're coming up with a list of books into categories. And I understand the list they're making, their list they're providing, like 17 books on witchcraft, 18 books on lesbian fiction. They seem to be making the numbers up out of thin air. And some
Well,
books,
no, those numbers were not made out of thin air.
okay, but I mean, you're getting tarred with that brush. In fact, that there are people attacking diversity. There are people attacking Jewish literature, minority literature.
Well, see, I think you read that
witchcraft.
email wrong.
No, I didn't read the email. I'm talking about letters to the editor.
Okay.
There's some letters to the editor that appeared in the Arkansas Democrat Gazette and the Northwest Arkansas Times, people from out of town who've been supporting you, and they've taken upon themselves to
Well, you've
talk about the books.
You've got things all over.
Right.
There's a guy from Canada who wrote in that they printed that totally bashed me. I mean, I'm not responsible for what everybody else is doing, and I don't agree with people who support me, some of their opinions on stuff.
But that clouds a lot of people's minds when they read that.
Absolutely.
Because I think the Laurie Taylor's against diversity.
Right, which I am not. I got a letter from a gal who's a Wiccan. I had to look that up. Who was screaming at me about wanting to ban African American literature.
Well, again,
and I said,
yeah,
it's not me.
Again, because you're getting tarred by these letters to the editor, because these people are saying, well, there's so many books on African American literature, so many books on Jewish literature.
And I read that. I think that article was trying to say that we have 502 books on sex and only 2 books on African American history. Or African American fiction. That's because I know who wrote that article.
Do you think that someone looks at a book and they say, like, here you have 12 books on African American literature, 17,000 on sex. Is it possible that some of these books, the 17,000 on sex, could possibly be moved into the African American pile? There's a lot of overlapping here that could take place. But they seem to have the books into niches. So once you've got this book which is marked as a sex book, it's like, you've got that scarlet letter on.
The S.
The S, yes.
I would submit to you that I don't care what category it falls into, that if it discusses what these books discuss, which is a pervasive genre of unadulterated sexual escapades with no consequences, no feelings, that it totally desensitizes children to what I know to be the most beautiful, incredible relationship between a man and a woman in a married situation, then I think that it should be afforded the parents the right to deny that being accessible by their children.
Talking about consequences, and I interviewed you for a newspaper, and I did quote from a book called Lucky by Alice Sebold.
Okay.
And there are several graphic passages, which I'm not going to read out because this is going to be played at an early time of night. But this is I looked her up on the internet too.
Okay.
And this is a graphic account of her rape at the age of 18. And so that book definitely has consequences for the sex. It's not thrown in for gratuitous purposes. So it's possible that actually a lot of the sexual content in the book, there may actually be consequences, or there may be some underlying reason. It's not just thrown in there like in a long arm novel or something, just the sex part.
And I would agree with you, but I would also still say that because of that gratuitous sexual scene, that a parent need not be circumvented, knowing that their child reads that. I'm not saying that there's not some validity. I'm not saying that there's not some reason or some good that could come of some of these books. Like I said before, I think it's important for children to know about rape. I think it's important for them to know about drugs. We give them DARE programs, but we don't hand out hypodermic needles and say, well, we know that you're going to use them, so we're going to make sure you get a clean one so you don't get AIDS.
We don't hand them out in schools.
Right.
But we hand them out where we know there's a lot of drug use.
Well, we don't hand them out at the public school.
No.
We don't hand out firearms and say, look, we know, that you might run into a situation where you're going to need this, so we're going to teach you how to use it, but don't play with it. And so what we're doing, why is it okay to do that with sex? Why is it okay to say, okay, look, we're going to teach you everything there is to know about sex, and I do mean everything, using words that you can't use at school, you can't say, you can't talk about, it's improper to use, but we want you to read this material because we think you need to know. Now, in my brain, that doesn't mesh.
Right.
And I don't understand that line of thinking. Again, as a parent, if you are of that line of thinking, then I think you have every right to explore that with your child. I don't want to explore it with my child.
Right. How would you characterize your base of support? Would you say it's all conservative, or?
You know what's so funny is that I have done 7 talk shows now.
Yeah.
Radio. And out of the 7, 3 of those have been on the more liberal side. And what's so funny is they have agreed more fervently with me than those on the conservative side.
Now, which radio shows have you been on?
I was on Pat Lynch's show.
You're from Little Rock.
And he was incensed. He did a whole show on it, and then he did a whole blog on it. And he was like, I can't believe there's even a question to this. I did Don Elkin's show, and it was really funny because when I showed up, there was a young gal there that was going to be the guest after I was, and she was a liberal. Matter of fact, she walked in and she said, "Oh, you're the book lady." And I said, "Yeah." And then she, gave me some unsolicited, dialogue.
Right.
And all I did was I picked up some excerpts that I had and I handed it to her. And I said, "Do you have children?" She says, "Yes, I have 3 boys." And she was reading this stuff from this book, and she was mortified, and she said, "This is not at school." And I said, "Yes, it is." And I said, "Here's the thing is that you not only is it there for them to access, it's illegal for you to know about it." And she was enraged. And she said, I am like a flaming liberal. And she said, "I'm telling you, I don't want my kid reading this." And I said, "You know what? You're the first sane person. Anybody that I've talked to one-on-one that we can actually converse and have I get just pummeled in the press, and I get pummeled in email. And the people, and I would suggest that this happens on both sides. If I were a liberal person in some fight that was just basically common sense, I think that the conservatives would do this. But there's this tendency to just call me names and bash me and demoralize me instead of really finding out who I am and what this is about and why, because people don't investigate.
When you say get pummeled in the press, that's mainly letters to the editor. That's not in the news articles, though.
Well, I don't know. George Arnold kind of beat me up.
Well, that's a column, though. That's an opinion column.
Yeah.
But Mike Masterson did a piece on you.
He did
today.
He did, and I was pretty excited about that one. And not just because he defended me, and he did, but because he presented it as common sense, as, look, this is not, and please hear me when I say this is not ideological, this is not religious, this is parenting. And I'm just asking to be able to parent my children, for you to be able to parent your children. And everybody goes, well, then just teach your kids not to check this out. Tell me how to do that.
Yeah.
It's not marked, it's not identified, it's not rated, it's not restricted. Tell me how I would keep my kids from getting this stuff.
I guess you'd have to go online and check out the library.
Well, if she goes to the library during the day and I'm not at school, and she checks out a book called Beloved, because this author is touted, Toni Morrison, as being a great author, Pulitzer Prize winning, is that a book thing?
Yes.
Person, then she reads this book. It's a love story, okay? Little girls are excited about love stories, and then she gets into it, and there's all this vile language.
Yeah, it's not
damage has already been done.
It's not a Harlequin romance, no.
It's not, and the damage has already been done. My child has already been subjected to something that I am defiant that she not be subjected to. Now, did she do it intentionally? No. She didn't. I don't think that my children would go and seek this stuff out because I've taught them.
Yeah.
But you know what? Just the scenario I just laid before you is my greatest fear. And it's not a fear that she'll find out about sex. My little girls both know what sex is, how it happens, what oral sex is, what abortion is, what homosexuality is, what a lesbian is, what a gay guy is, what the other words that are associated with homosexuality, all the terms for genitalia that you can't say. Because you know what? I wanted to be the first one to tell them.
Right.
And that's what I'm saying. This has nothing to do with my fear of sex or my fear of my kids finding out what's out in the world. It has to do with I'm their parent, and I don't want this garbage in their brain as something that I don't know about.
What about the people who email you, especially the angry ones? Do you ever try to talk to them, converse with them?
Yes, actually I've sent them all an email back, and it's 50-50. 50-50 to date. 50% of them have said, you know what, I disagree with the banning thing, I disagree with censorship, but I would agree with you that it's every parent's right to be the ones that never agree with me are the ones that never hear what I say.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that everyone would agree with me, but I would think that the majority of people, especially parents, would agree that they should be the ones that have the final say as to if their child has access to this or not.
Now, you've been interviewed, I guess, by the Washington Times as well.
That never came to fruition. I mean, that was...
I think you were, quoted in an article they did.
I was?
I checked out their website. Yeah, they at least talked about you.
Okay. That could be. They didn't call me They must have gotten a quote from another interview
Yeah,
or
they didn't.
something
They
that they
didn't.
listened to.
There wasn't a lengthy interview. They just mentioned your efforts.
Okay.
And you've been on Johnny Tittle's show a lot. He's
Yes.
on AM radio.
I was on Point of View. I was on the Big Dave show out of Little Rock for KRN. I was on the Dave Ellswick show, KRN. I was on Don Elkin's show. So there's been a tremendous media,
Right.
and I really I don't understand why it became so inflamed. It wasn't an intentional thing.
Well, it touches upon something basic, I think. And of course, it does point to the fact that people should be aware of what their children are exposed to and what they read in schools. So,
That's all I'm asking.
yeah, and so I mean, I think this may be a healthy thing for Fayetteville, that people are more involved. This thing goes back, even in the 1980s, there was a big debate over the Chocolate War, which is an anti-war book in the Fayetteville schools. There was a big battle over that back in the 80s, and so these battles come back and forth all the time. So
I had heard of that. Somebody emailed me that, and
that's
the
still
same
in
one that
schools.
called me a Nazi.
Yeah, that's still in schools. Anyway, Laurie, I want to thank you very much for coming on the show.
I appreciate it.
Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next week.